Welcome to Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers, a once-a-week show covering all things Buffalo Sabres and NHL hockey. We thank you for joining us today, and to make sure you don't miss any future episodes, be sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube, follow and share us on Facebook, and catch the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com and on our Twitter feed. You can find us at Sabres Scoop, THW, and everything else at The Hockey Writer. So today, our guest is Hannah Garfield, a fellow writer from the THW team covering the Boston Bruins. Yeah, we played them a lot lately. Hasn't gone so well. You can find her on her Twitter at Hannah Garfield. How are you doing today, Hannah?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're doing pretty well, we just lost 8-4. Jeff Carter just had a 4-goal game, so that obviously wasn't that exciting to watch.
Yeah.
On the flip side, the Bruins just won 4-0.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, these two teams are not cut from the same cloth, evidently. But that, it hasn't been all bad for the Sabres. They've had, excuse me, a bit of a turnaround in recent weeks as far as what's gone good for them. A couple of things have. One feel-good story I'm sure you've seen, Hannah, is that Michael Hauser, the goalie, who just won his first two games. Well, he lost tonight, actually, but he's been playing every game for the Sabres, which is pretty cool. Won his first two against the New York Islanders back-to-back games. And he made 34 saves in the first game and then 45 saves in the second game. And, that's been a great story for him. Obviously, it came out that he had a bunch of surgeries as a child to correct some problems with his feet, I believe it was. And for him to go through that, make it to the NHL, really cool story, even though I don't expect him to be, with the Sabres past this season as he is on an expiring contract. Still a great story for a not so great season. Jordan and Hannah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it from an internal and external perspective. And let's go to you, Jordan, first.
Yeah, man. I mean, when we signed this guy, I thought it was an outside chance that he would even get into some games, but the whole league was really watching him thrive there in those first two games. He made all three saves in the shootout as well. And, although he does kind of look flimsy at times, kind of has that Michael Hutchinson style of goaltending, it's pretty cool to just to watch and have a feel good story for such a crazy season it's been as a Buffalo Sabres fan. Like watching that, the reaction of the whole team after they won that game against the Islanders. It was so cool to watch, in my opinion. I'm curious to get your thoughts, Hannah.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with him as a player before, seeing that he was going to be playing his first game and, seeing the story, which is great. I think any type of feel good story is great for the sport of hockey. I mean, especially in a week like this week where their main headlines weren't dominated by a very, feel good story. I think those are the type of things that really actually create new fans and drive people to want to watch NHL hockey games, because it's great when you see the reactions of the teammates when something like, a Michael Hauser story and he, wins his first two games and the team reacts that way. Like that's the type of thing that I think will create new hockey fans.
Yeah, totally. And just speaking of goaltending, the Sabres actually signed a goaltender by the name of Stefanos Lekash to a one-year contract. And he was actually signed a day after being signed to a professional tryout contract with the team. So I'm curious to see what his future is going to go. I'm just curious, Brandon, what are your early thoughts on Lekash?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to get into a game this season unless it's the very last game. It is just crazy to see how the Sabres goalie depth has just totally just been overhauled this season. Obviously, Olmark's not going to play the rest of the year. Hutton's out, and Luukkonen, don't rush him in. He'll do all right. But I think Lakash could actually be with the Rochester Americans in the AHL next season. So that is a guy I actually could see staying. And yeah, we wanted to make sure we talked about this because, Hannah, we're going to get to some Bruins goaltending depth questions later in the show. So we'll tease that now, but we'll save them for later. Just highlighting the two teams that are going to have some choices in net to make as we move into next season. Obviously, for you guys, you still have some games left this year, but we have next season to think about. And then one more note, a Sabres note here is that Brett Murray made his NHL debut tonight. That's yet another Sabres defenseman to make his NHL debut this season. Jacob Bryson, Will Borgen. I might be forgetting some, but Jordan, I didn't catch much of the latter half of the game, so I can't really speak to how well he played throughout the entirety of the game. Do you have anything to add?
I think he looked steady, as good as he could. I mean, obviously the team did lose 8-4, so there were some hiccups, especially in the defensive end. We couldn't break the puck out as smoothly, getting the zone entries out of the defensive zone. But, he did showcase, some of his potential, I thought, in this game. And I think, and we're in the latter part of the season here, and the Sabres are literally just rotating through so many guys. I think they played, I believe, 13 or 14 defenders this season because they've already traded a guy like Brandon Montour to Florida, who's thriving there, by the way. So,
Sure.
yeah, just so many guys coming in and out. And honestly, I thought he looked pretty good this game.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Drake Caggiula scored his first 2 goals as a Sabre. So he has a 2-goal game. Tage Thompson scored as well. And then Skinner scored late. So that's not really, how the Sabres wanted it to go. But 4 goals of offense, that's a heck of a lot more than they've gotten, in many past games. Hannah, you mentioned that the Bruins had a pretty big win tonight. They were playing the Rangers, who we're going to get to them later because that team, there's so many storylines, and we'd like to get your thoughts too, just from another division opponent. But any notes on this on the Bruins tonight? I know Hall is playing on the Krejci line, correct?
Yes.
Taylor
No.
Hall, yeah, and so Krejci, I believe he's been on a tear. I saw there was a graphic, however many points since the trade deadline. So yeah, they look at that.
Yeah. Hall's been a great fit on the second line, but also in tonight's game, Jake DeBrusk finally scored. He got his 5th of the season, and Brandon Carlo also scored. So those are some good, happy Bruins notes.
There we go. Yeah. Well, we'll reset the show here with a early mid episode interlude and plug. You're watching Sabres Scoop again, presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube, follow and share on Facebook, and catch all of the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com and on our Twitter feed, which again is at Sabres Scoop THW. And now we have a lot of Bruins and Sabres talk. And this is why we wanted to bring you on, because we hadn't had a Bruins perspective on the Taylor Hall trade, and also Curtis Lazar, Anders Bjork, and so much more. So we're going to jump right into it. Jordan, why don't you kick it off for us, because there is a lot to cover here, and I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, obviously, we know there were 3 players involved in that Taylor Hall trade back at the trade deadline. And let's start with the star player who's clearly thrived in Boston, as we kind of all expected. Who thought he wouldn't? That's Taylor Hall. And my first question to you, Hannah, is how has he really improved the team? And what kind of impact will he have in the playoffs, in your opinion?
Yeah. So, as most Bruins fans, I'm sure know that the Bruins second line has needed a wing for years, and they've tried getting somebody at the trade deadline for the last 3 years. They got Rick Nash in 2018. They got Marcus Johansson in 2019, who ended up not really playing on the second line and more on the third line with Coyle. And then they had Andre Kasha in 2020. So it's, how those all work. None of them really worked out. So to finally, kind of see, a trade deadline deal work out with Taylor Hall. I mean, he's come over and he has fit Krejci's playing style so well. And both the two of them and Craig Smith, who's been playing on the other wing, all 3 of them have had phenomenal months back in April. They're Hall in 14 games, he has 6 points and 12 goals. He's a plus 14. So they're generating offense when that line is on the ice, which is a game changer for the Bruins because, for the last couple seasons, it's been the top line generates 90% of the offense, and then you occasionally get some contributions from the rest of the forward lines. And now with Taylor Hall and play a revitalized David Krejci and a great Craig Smith, they actually have a threatening second line again, which is great going into the playoffs.
Oh yeah, totally. And I mean, I saw with Boston going into the trade deadline, their 5-on-5 scoring was on the lower side of the league, especially in terms of various metrics that are out there. And he's totally improved the team in that regard. And it kind of leads like this guy should probably stay, right? So I'm just curious, like, what are the odds of him resigning, and what type of contract could you see him garnering this offseason?
Yeah, so I actually recently, one of my most recent articles, self-plug for myself, I predicted, kind of what I see as the odds of each, unrestricted free agent getting re-signed. And out of the Bruins have about 10 unrestricted free agents, so they have a lot going into the offseason. But I really think Taylor Hall is probably the most likely to re-sign. He's shown that has a great fit in Boston. He's expressed on multiple occasions that he wants to stay in Boston and wants to stay long term. And the Bruins really should make him a priority to resign, because if he resigns, that probably increases the likelihood that Krejci resigns, who is also an unrestricted free agent this year. So I think he's probably gonna be one of the first dominoes to fall. I don't see it being a super long term contract, just given he's playing so great right now, but also obviously had that kind of downplay in Buffalo for most of the season. So do you want to sign a guy who has had a great 20 games but a bad 40 games? Do you want to sign him to a super long-term contract? So I'm expecting probably something in the 3 to 4 year range. I think ideally ideally you would want to try to go in the 6 to 8 million range for like AAV, but I don't know how likely they're like, I don't know how likely you're going to be able to sign him to the lower end of 6. That would be, but I also think it'd be hard for the Bruins, who have Bergeron and Marchand on really, and Pastrnak are all making less than $7 million a year. So I think it would be hard for them to offer Hall that much more than that.
Yeah, those are very team-friendly contracts. That's like Nathan McKinnon level right there. Yeah, those are very team-friendly, and you're right. It would be a hard bargain to sell to the other players. Hey, this guy who just came in, whether they win the cup or not, hey, we're going to pay him 9 to 10 million, which is what we've heard is the ballpark what he's really looking for, at least if he were to stay in Buffalo. He might take less money to stay with a better team, but that'll totally be interesting to see. And it's interesting, you mentioned that he's adding like that secondary scoring punch to the Bruins. It's interesting because he said when he was traded to Boston, that he was looking forward to having sort of a smaller spotlight on him, playing under some players who are better producers. And it looks like he's filling that role perfectly, fitting right in. He doesn't have to play alongside Jack Eichel and the spotlight's completely on him. So that's a very good fit. Other Sabre who went to you guys was Curtis Lazar. And we haven't heard much of his name, obviously just based on the role he's playing. But how is he fitting in? Since we haven't heard so much of him, Jordan was saying he's playing sort of a fourth line minute type role. How's that working out?
Yeah, he's definitely on the fourth line. I think they've also played him on the third line at some points, but he's really, he's a bottom 6 guy at the Bruins right now. But he's added that kind of fire to the bottom 6, because the Bruins, I think a lot of the heat is on the second line, and a lot of the attention has been on how poorly, the second line has produced. But really, the bottom 6 is also just hasn't played with a lot of energy on this season. That you watch them play, and 2 years ago when the Bruins were in the cup, the fourth line of Wagner, Achari, and Corrali was a game changer. You could put them out there against the top line guys of the opponents and they would shut them down. They weren't generating a ton of offense, but they were really, that energy line, which is what you want out of your fourth line. And that's really been missing this season. And Lazar has, he's not scoring all the goals, but he has brought some of that energy and reinvigorated that line a lot. So he's also been a, not as talked about addition, but has also been a really worthy addition, who has brought a lot of good components to the Bruins offense.
Yeah, and we're talking about offense. The Sabres only received one player besides that measly second-round pick for Taylor Hall, and that's Anders Bjork. And he's honestly been kind of a surprise. He's gotten 3 goals, 3 assists, and 6 points for 14 games. So he's playing up at a roughly 40-point play. He's primarily playing on the second line with Arttu Ruotsalainen and Dylan Cousins. And I'm just curious, what do you think Buffalo got in this player? Because he has kind of impressed a lot of Sabres fans at first glance.
Yeah, I think Anders Bjork is a fantastic skater. And I think he struggled in Boston, where there's a ton of wings in that room, and there's a lot of shifting. There's been a lot of shifting amongst the lines and trying to shuffle people in and out of the lineup, as there's a lot of pressure because things just haven't been working with generating offense. And I think he's one of the guys that's really kind of lost favor with the coaches and with the GM. And really stopped, he had some injuries early in his career and just has been moved up and down the lineup and just wasn't able to find his spot in Boston. But I still think there was such great value to him as a player, as you're seeing in Buffalo. He is not generating a ton of points, but more than he was generating in Boston. And I think part of that also comes with he's getting an opportunity. Like you said, he's playing on the second line. He was, in his time in Boston, he only averaged around 12 minutes a game. So he was really playing, less time and wasn't really getting that much of an opportunity. So, he generally seemed like he was well liked in Boston. He seemed like a decent guy. So I'm really glad to see that he is doing well in Buffalo. And I think Buffalo got a player who is hungry for more opportunity.
Yeah, we can totally see that. That speed you mentioned, you definitely see that when he's out there on the ice. Totally makes a difference. And yeah, like Jordan said, he's been exciting, putting up some points, which has definitely made some fans optimistic for the future. So hopefully he works out. That would be fantastic. It's not too often the Sabres get a good end of the stick in a trade. So we'll see how that works. But when we're talking Bruins, the biggest storyline of the past week for me has been that they clinched their spot in the playoffs. And that was, not that people expected them to miss, but earlier in the season, it started to become a question. Like, is this team, are they on the bubble of the playoff conversation? Or, this is a team I had ranked way high in like my own personal power rankings, like top 5. And they've definitely looked like that of late. So they just clinched. Couple of questions here. Where are they going to finish? Because I believe they're currently at 3rd, I think, in the division. Are they a legitimate cup contender? And which opponent out of the 3, would you ideally like to play?
So, like you said, the Bruins have kind of had this up and down regular season where they started really high and then all the kind of issues got exposed with their depth scoring, and they also had a bunch of injuries. And now that they're playing, like they up to their capability again, I am much more optimistic about how they could do in the playoffs. Originally, a month ago, if you asked me, I would have said they'll squeak into the playoffs because I just don't see a world where Bergeron doesn't put this team on his back and drag them into the playoffs. But I didn't think that they would even come out. I didn't think they would win a series. Now I'm a little bit more hopeful. They're sitting in 3rd. I think I don't see them, beating the Capitals and getting into 1st in the standings. I think they'll probably finish 3rd. I think that they'll probably stick where they are, which would put them in a matchup against the Pittsburgh Penguins, which
Fun.
little nerve-wracking, especially with Malkin now back from injury.
That's right.
But I do think if they keep playing like they're playing now and they can really ride this momentum through the playoffs, I tentatively think they could be a cup contender. But with that being said, I think the East Division, any of those teams wouldn't be surprising to see them in the Stanley Cup finals. I think all 4 of the teams that have clinched have had fantastic seasons and are really, really look like they could be champions.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about the playoffs. Well, there's kind of been a goalie debate kind of fuming here with Boston, and I kind of feel bad for Tuuka Rask because this has just gone on forever. It feels like all of the horrendous takes that get thrown around this guy who's been one of the best goalies of the past decade. But Jeremy Swayman, like, where did this guy come from? The 22-year-old currently has a 7-2 record, a 946 save percentage, a 1.44 goals against average in his 9 starts. Is he looking to potentially steal some starts from Tuuka Rask here as the playoffs loom?
I think it's still going to be Rask for the playoffs. I personally have never really understood the hatred around Tuuka Rask. There's so many people that just in Boston that don't like him, and have never really subscribed to that or understood to it. He is still playing. He is 34, 35. I think he's 34. He's still right around his career averages in goals against average and save percentage. Right now, I think he sits at a 0.919 save percentage, and his career average is 0.922. So he's right around his average, even at the age of 34. And he actually has a lower than career average in goals against and 2.717 when normally it's 2.26. So he's playing well, and he has, he's 14-4-2 of the season. So Jeremy Swayman has been really good, and he's going to be really good. But Tuuka Rask, in my mind, hasn't done anything to lose his spot as being the starting goaltender going into the playoffs. Sure, he could, he has if his injury acts up, he was injured for a couple weeks there, or if he just for some reason completely falls apart. It's great that we have Jeremy Swayman should be the backup over Halak, and he should be kind of the next man up if something happens to Rask. But in my opinion, Rask is still the guy that deserves to be in net. And Swayman has a great future ahead of him, and I'm so excited that we have him, but he's still only played 9 games. And I think, we need to be, when we have these great young goaltenders that come into the NHL, like Carter Hart, who burst onto the scene and was incredible and was heralded as the next one, and now is, taking a step back this season. I just think that shows that we need a little bit more skepticism when looking at the numbers of these guys with very small game sample sizes.
Yeah, and great answer there, Hannah. And just before we talk about, the whole Tom Wilson saga and how crazy long that's probably going to be, I'm just curious about Yaroslav Halak. He's one of the best backup goalies, probably a top 3 in the entire league the previous 2 seasons. And now all of a sudden, it kind of looks like he has lost his job to this young Swayman here. So what do you see? Like, what's the future for Yaroslav Halak on the Bruins, in your opinion?
I feel bad for Halak because obviously he got COVID and he tested positive, and that's why he was unable. That's kind of opened the door for Swayman. So you feel bad that he's kind of lost his position in this way. But I think he's definitely, in his last couple of starts, he just hasn't looked as good as he has in the past. And I think the Bruins are going to want to start getting, if anybody is going to get playoff time outside of Rask, the Bruins are going to want to do Swayman because he's their future. And Halak is he's going to be a UFA this summer, and I just don't see them re-signing him, especially when you have a cheaper option in Swayman to be the backup next year. And if for some reason something happens to Swayman or he needs more time in the AHL, they also have Vladar, who has also played games this season and looked pretty good in them, who is, again, another cheaper option. So as much as, I'm grateful for Halak for his time in the Bruins, and I think he will be looked at favorably when remembered, I do think his time has come to an end. And I hope he gets a job elsewhere, because I think he could easily get a job anywhere else in the league.
Oh yeah, I totally think he could, just looking at his level of play. And with that, let's head into our general NHL news. And it's time to talk about the Tom Wilson saga that just took over the NHL this past week. So what we're going to do here is we're going to break it down into parts and dissect what events took place. So let's talk about what actually happened. So Wilson cross-checks Pavel Buchnevich and then pulls Artemi Panarin by the head, grabs his hair, and slams him onto the ice. And, most people were expecting, he doesn't technically have repeat offender status at this point in time, even though that's just crazy to me. I don't know how that, of course the NHL has a rule like that. And he only received a $5,000 fine from NHL player safety. And that sparked outrage amongst the fans, players, and even the Rangers organization. This is quite obviously a very dangerous play. Now it's set a precedent heading into the playoffs. So I'm just curious, Hannah, how do you feel about potentially playing this team in the playoffs and, having to play Tom Wilson, basically?
I mean, Washington Capitals, actually, the Bruins have played really well against them this year. I think they have a record of 4-1-2 in their 7 games so far. So obviously it's not necessarily a bad matchup for the Bruins standpoint. Do I like that they have to go against Wilson? No, because I do think he's a dirty player, and I think that he should have been suspended. And it's crazy that he's not a repeat offender when he had a 7-game suspension this year for attacking Brandon Carlo's head and boarding it, it was such a bad play and watching it in real time. But do think the Capitals are more than just Tom Wilson. And I think that the Bruins, if they were to match up against them, they do have players who can kind of put him in his place. We have Nick Ritchie is great and brings a great level of toughness to the team, which the team will definitely be needed going into this playoffs.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we saw 3 fights in the opening, second of the game yesterday. And obviously that was probably the most tuned NHL game of the season. But like, is that really the message you want to be promoting, to the new fans that are especially going to be coming after this ESPN TNT tournament comes? I know with the older demographic, they love that stuff, but like, I feel like the NHL should be trying to, promote their game in a different way with like the Connor McDavid, the speed and skill of the game, and the fact that this even took place in the first place is a joke. Like, I'm assuming you guys agree to that, right? Tom Wilson should have been suspended.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of an old saying that I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out, and that's sort of what happened yesterday. I caught bits and pieces of it. Obviously saw the stuff on video, but what was interesting is that Zdeno Chara was out there for the opening faceoff, and he did not engage in a fight. He actually kind of just looked like he's like, "Come on, guys, let's get things going here." And obviously, at this stage in his career, I'm sure he'd like to play more hockey than deal with stuff like that. But you know what? You barely hear anybody complain about Brad Marchand right now with Tom Wilson in the league. He's not getting up to as many antics as Wilson is, so that's funny. But as a continuation of this, the drama didn't end there. Okay, I thought, wow, this is already totally out of hand. But then the New York Rangers released a statement, and obviously they were spurred by the fact that Panarin was, taken out for the rest of the season, and they were just barely hanging on by a thread for their playoff hopes. And actually, after tonight's loss, officially eliminated, by the way. But they released a statement, the Rangers did, calling out the player safety department and mentioning George Parros by name, former NHL tough guy who made a career on enforcement and has since gone into that player safety role, obviously under fire all the time. And a day after the statement was released, John Davidson and Jeff Gordon, the GM and president of the New York Rangers, were abruptly fired. And the ownership said it had nothing to do with the statement, which a lot of people just aren't buying. So I'm going to throw it out to both of you. We'll go to Jordan first. Do you believe that this really has nothing to do with their statement as they have tried to lead on?
Oh, no way. And you're even seeing all the media members come out with this, like Darren Drager, various members of that pedigree. And it's just such weird timing. And, there's all these rumors circulating. It sounds like potentially maybe Davidson and Gorton, were trying not to have this. They were unaware of the statement and they didn't agree with it. At least that's what the owner, James Dolan, is maybe trying to convey by leaking that out. But it's just crazy to me, because the Rangers clearly have built their team significantly well. And I've heard crazy arguments like, oh, they had to fall into their hands. And yeah, I guess you could say potentially getting Adam Fox kind of was a fall into their hand because he was only going to play there, but you still had to acquire that level of play talent and then develop him. You still, yeah, they might have gotten lucky getting Alexi Lafreniere, but it's not like he's the reason they're exactly winning right now. Not that he hasn't proved a lot as the season's gone on, but the talent that they're surrounding the guys like Panarin and Zibanejad, what they've been able to do over his tenure is quite amazing. And, you would never expect a guy like this to get fired over Jim Benning, it's just crazy to me. And in my opinion, there's quite clearly a correlation here. And I do think one day we're going to figure out what truly happened here.
I completely agree with that. I think if it was really just about the performance of the team, you're already out of the playoffs. You had 3 games left. You could have waited until after the season. This was definitely this whole week played a role in that.
Yeah, totally. And this isn't even it, guys, because crazy enough, there's actually been suspensions after this event has taken place. So let's start, Shane Gostisbehere took a suspension in his game. And Pavel Buchnevich ended up taking a suspension after a cross-check on Anthony Mantha in that crazy game. And the Gostisbehere was actually on Mark Friedman, a rookie. And it's just crazy. We're seeing 1 to 2 game suspensions being held after this. I'm just curious, Brandon, what is your take on that? The fact that Tom Wilson only gets a fine and that these plays afterwards, were deemed worthy of a suspension.
Yeah, this is something that might come up in the summer GM meetings because there's a lot to unpack here. Gostisbehere, I'm not sure is too related to this, but Buchnevich, I think, is directly related to all the events that happened, obviously, because it happened against the Capitals again. Anthony Mantha was. And, that was definitely reactionary by the league, but it was the wrong reaction to take. Like, oftentimes they do. And that's just how things go down. But I think they'll take a long, hard look at the rules and the precedent that they've set in the offseason and figure it out from there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we have to hope something happens, right? Because I want to have some fun going into the playoffs, and although this drama is quite interesting to look at, I like the game that's played on the ice, the goals that are scored, and looking at those tidbits of the game, because that's where the game truly is heading. I don't think ESPN, as much as they are a drama, as much as we see in the NBA with all that drama stuff, the product on the ice really is what gets things going. And I'm just curious, Brandon, let's lead it up, because the Stanley Cup is going to be awarded soon, guys. We're going to see it again. I'm just curious, let's get some Stanley Cup predictions here. Who is winning the Stanley Cup? Let's start with you, Brandon.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Throw it out to me. Let's see. I will take one quick cursory overview of the current standings, and I'm going to go with a very hard choice, the Vegas Golden Knights. That's actually not hard for me to make as all and make at all. Sorry. And I actually, grew up a Sharks fan, so I have some disdain towards the Golden Knights, but I don't have so much pride that I can't swallow it and admit this is a fantastic hockey team. And I really think that they are putting it all together this year. Marc-Andre Fleury is standing on top of the world for them, and they just seem to have all the pieces. So it's going to be Vegas for me. Hannah, are you going to be a homer, or are you going to go outside your heart here and pick somebody else? I'm interested.
I mean, my heart says Bruins, but I also agree. I think the Vegas Golden Knights really have something special going on this year. And I guess my kind of dark horse thought is Carolina Hurricanes. I've really, been on fire this season. And I also have a soft spot for the Canes. So if it's not the Bruins, I would love for it to be the Canes, but I think it's going to be Vegas.
Yeah, guys, I do think the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to get decently far, but I don't think they are going to be able to beat the Carolina Hurricanes in a 7-game playoff series. We saw what happened to them with the Boston Bruins. They were I'm sure they still remember that. And to really win the Stanley Cup, you kind of have to gain that experience, and the Toronto Maple Leafs just haven't been there yet. I do think we'll see a Carolina-Colorado final. Either team, in my opinion, could win that. I don't know if I can pick just one, but if I have to, I will say Colorado, even though there are it seems like Nazem Kadri is kind of slowing down, and there's some questions surrounding that organization. I still think, you got Nathan McKinnon, Sam Girard's having a career year there. Their goaltending is just from just phenomenal, and that I'm speechless there. And Cale Makar, it's just crazy how I feel like Cale Makar isn't even being talked about enough anymore. Like, this guy is still insane. He's a point per game as a defenseman. He's just been electrifying to watch, and Nathan McKinnon's even in awe of him. It's hard for me not to pick the Colorado Avalanche.
Great picks all around. Well, as we wrap down here, we thank you again for joining us. This has been Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe and to the show on YouTube, follow and share on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at Sabres Scoop THW. Thank you again, Hannah, for joining the show to talk some Bruins hockey and other stuff as well. It was a lot of fun. And once again, you can find her on Twitter at Hannah Garfield _. Got to make sure we get that underscore in there. And don't miss out on all of the other great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com. For Jordan and Hannah, this is Brandon, and this has been Sabres Scoop. Until next time.